But for those who weren't here last time, again, that is an AI-generated avatar entirely. So with that entirely, so you can now, AI is getting to the point where it's almost becoming indistinguishable from a real human. And those are some of the amazing technologies that really get us excited. For those, James did a great job pumping us up, but for those who aren't familiar with Wondour and what we do, we are based right here in Las Vegas. We are proud that we are based in Las Vegas. That's why we started these workshops, is to try to bring all of the technical knowledge that we're out there. We're working with companies out of Korea, Japan, and London, San Francisco, and we're really trying to help build up the Las Vegas community, help the local founders with that as well. And so we've had top 100 apps in over 85 countries. We've ranked above ESPN and so on across a variety. Number one app in Japan at one point. And we're just really excited to bring kind of the world of virtual reality, mobile applications, and everything that we work on to you. And so far across the body of work that we've had tens of millions of users across that body. And just kind of put in perspective, so we could fill the largest stadium in the world over 151 times with the number of users that have used our applications. And that is a number that we actually expect to double here by the end of just this year. And so we're very excited to be able to be bringing some of that here and representing Las Vegas as we go out into the world and get millions of downloads. We're happy to represent Las Vegas in that sense. And so today, really I want to focus on innovation. And so, in the stuff that we do, mobile applications, virtual reality applications, Metaverse, NFTs, whatever it may be, there's kind of a through line of how, well, regardless of what that is, how do you remain successful within that respective endeavor, right? What are really the keys to success? And I'm kind of here to argue on behalf of innovation being perhaps the singular most important facet of any entrepreneur, any society, and really with it carries a tremendous opportunity. And when I say it, not to be preachy, but truly believe that innovation can save the world. And the math actually generally ties out if you think about it, right? So if we solve problems faster than they arise, then ultimately we will progress and live longer, happier, healthier lives and be free of those problems. And so be critical today. I'm going to try to convince you that innovation is one of the most important things you could possibly focus on in your professional career and personal career. So if you Google innovation, there's kind of the standard definition, something like this: a new idea, method, or device. And that's a reasonable definition, but you'll also notice that there are dozens and dozens of alternate definitions that entrepreneurs have made up or various resources have made up, because innovation encapsulates kind of its own definition to a lot of people. And for us, I really think that innovation, one of the most important facets, can be summarized in the term adaptability. And if you think about all of us here, everything that you see, the human race itself has been incredibly innovative. And not just innovative, but it has thrived over the centuries and millennia. And adaptability really is what allows that to occur. It's not just to survive, but it is to thrive. And through adaptability, again, translating that to your personal life and beyond, really we think is one of the most key importance to what it means to innovate. So going to the problem side of the house with this. So what do we know about problems as we're trying to assess, let's solve the world's problems together. So problems arise naturally. We both, they arise naturally as well as we create them. Even innovations themselves and inventions themselves can spark new problems. And so that's, kind of one element to keep in mind as we go about that. And problems arise at various rates of occurrence. A lot of problems can come at once. Just picture your own company, right? Everything can be running smoothly and all of a sudden you're bombarded with various problems. This is true on a macro scale and a micro scale. Problems have variable life cycles to a negative outcome. So that is basically how long from an occurrence would a problem stem, as well as once that problem is here, how long is the implication of that problem. There's a huge degree of variability there. Problems have various degrees of outcome significance. So a tiny hiccup could result in a problem that is relatively easy to solve, but has an enormous negative influence. And that can be the reverse, right? A huge event could occur that has a negative outcome, but the negative outcome isn't that significant. So again, there's huge variance when it comes to that. And then lastly, problems arise with various degrees of complexity. And again, the whole point of this is kind of bring it to yourself and bring it to your organizations and your startups or whoever it may be. Some problems are just really, really hard to fix, right? There's a lot of layers and a lot of complications with them, and some are incredibly simple. And so if you kind of wrap your head around those principles, it helps you balance the innovation equation. And so this, again, is about trying to figure out a way to mitigate more problems than they arise. And if we just do that perpetually, at an individual basis, at a societal basis, we do that again and again and again, society and ourselves will get better. So a couple key pieces to keep in mind is the rate of innovation needs to be greater than the rate of problem occurrence. So innovate more than problems come about. Seems simple enough. Positively applied innovation, so good net positive things, overwhelm the negatively applied innovation. So create better, holistically better for the common good innovations rather than the negative. And then the last piece, which is probably the most important, is the rate of application of innovation should exceed the rate of corresponding negative outcomes. So that is both in creating a new innovation, it needs to override basically any negative outcomes, more net positive. And really when you're balancing the equation, if you just think about it, if we're able to not only innovate, but innovate quickly and innovate in a way that moves, kind of prioritizing these things, if you try to innovate and try to address the big problems that are easy to solve, that's a fantastic method, right? As you're going about your daily life, just think, what are those big things that cause big problems that might actually be easy to fix, right? Versus those things that aren't really causing too much of an issue and are incredibly complex. So I know this is kind of getting a little kind of hypothetical here, but the reason is this is actually how we think about a lot of things when it comes to running our business and running an organization, is thinking through this in a bit of a calculated way and make sure that we're always effectively prioritizing and balancing these things. And so prioritizing is exactly what we should be doing. And so going through one by one, first thing, in order to prioritize the problems, again, personal or running a corporation or a country, you have to identify the problems. You have to take time to be able to find the problems, be honest about what those problems may be. Forecast the problem life cycles. So basically, we chart the skies, we chart how NFL teams are going to be doing this season. We'll do the same thing with problems. You understand what problems you have today and understand where you think they're going to be in the coming weeks and months and so on. Rank them in order of impact of significance, right? Big problems causing big pains, prioritize those, right? Smaller problems causing smaller pains, deprioritize those. And then rank them in order of complexity to solve, right? Doing those two things in combines, right? What can you fix in a day? It's like when you go in the morning and some great advice that you hear from like Jeff Bezos and all these leaders is go through and try to knock out the things in your workday that are the biggest pains in your life, the things that are going to bog you down for the rest of the time, for the rest of the day, the rest of the week, and try to tackle those pieces. Now, obviously, there's going to be long-term, very complex things that you may not be able to solve right away. But again, if you're able to rank these in order, you can at least have that mental stress relieved and understand how to be able to work through those. And then from there, just try to balance it. Do the best you can. Try to knock all of these problems out in a reasonable order. Okay? Again, significant, impactful problems that are easy to solve, do those first. That one's pretty easy. But it gets more complex the more you go down the list. So as you have maybe kind of middle-of-the-road complex problems that might have middle-of-the-road kind of execution pieces, how do you solve it, right? We all see these in our daily life, but keeping these in the back of your mind and trying to figure out a bit of a scientific approach to it can be valuable. And that leads us to, okay, so in theory, innovation is important, problems need to be solved. So how do you personally actually go about creating innovation, right? So it's all hypothetical, but what are some of the key tangible things we can take away? And starting with, don't just prioritize it, all of those pieces, but actually do it. And a great example of that is in terms of the not doing it necessarily. So by the numbers, so 97% of Fortune 500 CEOs that were polled ranked innovation as one of the absolute top priorities they could possibly have. But when you went and asked those same companies and asked all of their employees, did they think that made sense? And surprisingly, no, they didn't. So 51% don't have enough time to work on ideas, they reported. 53% don't believe their company has a strong innovation plan at all. They don't even know who's responsible for innovation. And then the actual customer is also prioritizing innovation. So you kind of have the sandwich at the top of leadership, and then you have your end consumer prioritizing it, but these companies aren't actually doing it a lot of the times. Their employees don't really have a response. Some of these things are easy to tackle, right? 51% don't have enough time, prioritize it, give them time. 53% don't believe their company has an innovation plan, come up with one, make it clear, make it visible. Don't know who's responsible for innovation, make a decision maker. Some of these things are pretty easy to tackle, and some people are doing it better than others. And so some that are doing better than others, expanding on that is quantifying what is innovation. What are the attributes that really sum that up? So McKinsey, one of the leading consulting firms in the world, they interviewed and surveyed 2,500 global executives of the leading companies. Reminds me of my toddler. And so they went and of these 2,500, they grouped them into quartiles. So top 25%, 25, 25, all the way down. The top 25%, those represent the companies that are kind of objectively doing the best. Highest growth numbers, highest revenue numbers, change over time. So they looked at who was really at the top and that leadership, all the way down that list. And then they came up with questions to try to understand, okay, well, how are these people behaving by these quartiles? Because they're all relatively successful companies, but is there any difference between the top of the top and the bottom segment? And they found that there was a dramatic, significant difference between those at that top quartile and especially those at the bottom, even between the first and second. So let's go through a couple of the pieces that McKinsey tried to quantify and tried to associate with innovation. So to aspire, do you regard innovation-led growth as critical? Do you have targets to reflect this, right? Do you have a goal? Do you have a plan about innovation? Do your employees actually understand that? If you look at the top performers, right, kind of this example applies through. So 55% of those in the top quartile said yes, they do prioritize it. And if you look at the bottom quartile, again, these are 2,500 global successful companies still, in that bottom, only 10%. That is a huge disparity between those who are considering kind of aspiring messages. And you'll see this trend persist, right? So when it comes to actually understanding what are the attributes you need to surround your life with to innovate. So choose, do you invest in coherent time and risk balanced portfolio initiatives? Are you actually making a decision? Are you investing your capital towards that? Discover, do you have differentiated business, market, and technological insights? Do they translate to a winning value prop? Are you allowing time to just try new, different, varied things? Again, look at this difference, right? 44% of the top performing companies, that top quartile, 44% said yes, we prioritize this significantly. The bottom quartile, the worst performing of that segment, only 2%. And these things, I mean, it just persists facet after facet. Evolve, do you create new business models? Do you allow for change? The gap, 27%, even between first and second, 27 to 10%. Accelerate, do you try to beat the competition, try developing and launching innovations quickly and effectively? 35% prioritize, and you see it just tanks after that top quartile. Scale, do you launch innovations at right scale? This is something we see a lot with startups and prioritizing funding allocations and how much capital you're raising, is do you launch ideas, if you're a multi-billion-dollar company and you launch an innovative new product and it represents 0.001% of your overall spend, yeah, you're innovating, but to what degree? Are you actually doing that at the proper scale to get something done, to make a true impact down the line? We see this a lot at all levels, is really, they love the idea, but they're not willing to commit to it. They're not willing to really put the resources needed to scale. Last two, extend. Do you win by creating and capitalizing on external networks? So beyond just yourself, and we'll get into this later with people, but really, we do this a lot at Wondour. So it's just beyond, obviously we have the people who we're a part of, but there's incredible resources out there. And are you willing to work with other companies? Are you willing to create partnerships? Are you willing to extend your intellectual property insight in your area of expertise? Huge differentiator there. And last one on this section is mobilize. Are you creating a culture of innovation? Do the people that you have, do they feel independently motivated to go out and innovate, to go out and create? Are you actually leveraging all those resources? Again, 42% at the top, just 5% at the bottom. So McKinsey, some of the smartest people in the world, this is how they define innovation and things that are being prioritized, actionable plans. And just other versions of kind of action plans is 25 companies with the most patents in 2021. And so this is, Apple. Apple is known for filing a ton of patents. IBM, Samsung, LG, TCL, who we talked about. So just the top 25 companies in terms of patents. In terms of the number, they represent 69,721 total patents between them. And so it is absolutely massive, the amount, and we've seen this ourselves. So some of the work that we've done, we have to benchmark ourselves across what Apple is doing because we're submitting our own patent portfolios. But they have entire segments of these companies, of hundreds and hundreds of people, that they're filing patents all day long. They're not implementing these. Us as consumers don't even know what's going on behind the scenes. They're sitting behind, sitting in a table somewhere, sitting in a drawer, might be used in the future. But this is their path where they're investing. They're developing patents, they're developing whole market competitive moats that are going to maybe benefit them next year, maybe benefit them 10, 15, 20 years, maybe never. But they know that if they do this enough and they do this consistently, they're going to hit some home runs. And when it talks about kind of innovation, if you think of a traditional job experience and you go in and they ask, okay, what's your experience? Right? And if you have zero experience, then you are escorted off of the property and that, no thank you, come back later. With innovation, it's weirdly the opposite. The better questions might be, what experience do you have not having any experience? Because you're going just blindly into the unknown. There's no blueprint. You have to get comfortable with the discomfort, with not knowing anything about what you're about to explore. It's kind of this amorphous blob. You might know that you have a general guidepost. You want to innovate within this, the field of virtual reality, for example. And you want to do an application for productivity in some capacity. But that's about it. Maybe that's your guiding light. And so as you go into that, you may know nothing. And so you have to be really comfortable with boldly going into the unknown, not knowing what the outcome is going to be. A lot of the times this is putting your own job at risk, right? It's putting your livelihood at risk because you just have to throw yourself out there. So again, lack of experience is innately part of what it is to be living in an innovative culture. We experience this. We feel very much like these astronauts going up into the unknown sometimes. We're just out there throwing ourselves out, and hopefully we come across a good idea. But we really allocate and give ourselves enough time. And as you operate in the unknown, just know that it's not only yourself. So you have to be comfortable with that from an emotional perspective, right? It can often be anxiety-inducing. And that's the thing you experience with entrepreneurs a lot, is everything's an unknown. Because you don't even know if you're going to be in operation in a year. If you work for IBM and you're like an analyst, you're going to be there next year, and you're going to be there 30 years from now. It's going to be fine. If you're starting a company, whether it's a restaurant or a tech company, you don't know if you're going to be around next year. And sometimes the statistics would actually suggest that you're not going to be. And so you have to be comfortable with that. You have to know how to emotionally handle that and also put that on for your team. Because maybe you're guiding a whole team. They feel the same way, but they need some sort of leadership, some sort of guidepost in that scenario. And that's what we see in really just being comfortable with having no clue what's going on, or at least a slight clue, and trusting ultimately the process. And then staying in that moment. This is something that a lot of people don't do when they're trying to ideate, come up with the next great idea, really brainstorm a feature. Let's say it's a feature of an application, or maybe it's a menu item. Again, you can tie it not just to technology, but you really have to just be comfortable with letting yourself sit for hours and hours and days in a period of discovery, where it doesn't necessarily feel like you're being productive, but really if you trust that part of the process, you'd be amazed that, okay, after an hour, you have no idea, right? After 2 hours, you're kind of getting into a groove, you're starting to throw out some bad ideas, and with bad ideas eventually come good ideas. And we'll spend a surprisingly large amount of time, and every ounce of you says, well, I want to kind of break away from this and go do something productive where I can check a box. It's very tempting. But really we have found that the greatest ideas that we've had have often been encountered because we truly just allowed ourselves to stay in the moment despite it feeling like it's not a productive use of time. Very tempting. Dylan, who will come up for Q&A, he's very good at this. I am not as good at that aspect. And so he will try to drag me back as I go to try to just go check a box on something. Drives me nuts. And going through some of the principles to apply, again, trying to create an innovative culture and product, deconstruct things down to the most fundamental level. So what are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? Strip out the garbage, strip out information you may have heard, even if it's a current version. Let's say you're trying to redesign a microphone, right? Strip things back to what its core purpose is at its base. This is something really first principles thinking is very, very useful, right? It kind of gets the clutter and the garbage out of the way when you're trying to innovate and create ideas. Human design philosophy. So this is something we strongly prescribe to, and you're just going through these, embrace a minimalist approach. Don't overcomplicate things. Whether it's a feature, whether it's a design, whatever it may be, don't overcomplicate things. Strip things down to their core of what they should be. Focus on natural experiences. So think that can apply to gestures on phones. When Apple is very, very good at this. So they were when they came out with the iPhone, it's okay, the keyboard, sure, but wouldn't it just make more sense to be able to use my finger and just swipe? It feels so obvious to us right now, but really those are the types of things we're talking about when it's focus on natural experiences, natural gestures, natural behaviors. Don't fight against the grain on those, embrace it. Designed to evoke emotion, right? This is big for very popular mobile applications. This is when you walk into a building, the designs, the lighting, the feeling. What is it evoking? And it should evoke some degree of emotion. Hopefully it's a positive one if you succeeded. But this can apply to so many things. All these things on the design facet we see every day. Absolutely the most successful companies that we see, no matter what we're doing, are implementing some capacity of these. And build for senses. Sound, sight, touch. That's all we have. Really, we experience the world simply through those senses. That's it. You take one away, it vastly changes your human experience. So accommodate those. Understand it's not just sight. There's sound. Sound design is huge. You may not know, but you may be watching a movie, your favorite movie of all time. And you may like the track, but you never really thought about it. Well, was it Inception? What's Inception without sound? Without that incredible soundtrack, right? So that's not just appealing to the astounding visuals, but the sound has an incredible impact on that. And try to apply those pieces. And prioritize your team. This is the secret sauce. I think anybody who's run a successful business will have some degree of understanding of this. But this is your superpower. Your team is. No one person is going to possess all of the knowledge, all of the capacity to be able to create the greatest ideas of the future. Certainly that is not us, right? And in our world, it requires such a very varying degree of specialty to be able to develop an application, right? You have design, you have various types of engineers, you have 3D modelers, you have the thinkers who are trying to come up with a game, right? What are all the game experiences, the things that are going to evoke emotion, the things you just talked about? It's never consolidated really in a singular person. And so leverage your team, make sure they understand that they are allowed to spend time in innovating, allow them to spend time in failing and succeeding within that same space. It's incredibly successful, and the reason that we've had any statistic that looks impressive up there is not just because of the work of myself and James and Dylan, it is the team. It truly, truly is. So some more tactics, just to kind of go through some quick takeaways is optionality. So this is making sure that you have options to be able to pivot into the future. Don't stay so hard-minded on a singular, let's say it's, again, tying it back to applications, say it's a feature, right? Don't keep your mindset so focused on a feature that you have no consideration for anything else. Or a business model, right? Don't be so consumed with a singular business model that you cannot deviate away from that. Options give you flexibility in the future. It also allows you to change. Let's say the whole market changes. If you don't have optionality, if you haven't been thinking about it, you might be shut down overnight. And so keeping those types of pieces in mind, very, very useful. It's why companies survive beyond a year, beyond 2 years, and beyond the statistics. Get the core loop right. So what is that user experience exactly, from a consumer interacting with you all the way through transacting and coming back. That core loop of everything they touch along the way. Again, it can be a brick and mortar store from the moment they walk in. If you are part of the hotel industry, this is big. So they have a place called Blackfire Innovation Center. It's part of UNLV's tech campus they're building. And up there, so part of it is shared by one of the big casino companies here in town. It's by Caesars. And they actually have all of their kind of IT, it's their R&D department partially. So you'll walk in there and they have hotel rooms fully set up. And they'll walk in and they have people walk into the room and they just analyze every single motion. As soon as I step in the door, where do their eyes go? Where do their bodies go? What are they looking at? And they found, one example is people go straight to the window, the majority of people. So that experience, that from the moment they walk in to the window, what is that experience like? How do you analyze all those pieces? So that's part of that core loop. Understand how the user is interacting with you and make sure you can assess and at least understand each one of those and improve them. Iterate. So we'll talk about this more again and again and again. Iteration is absolutely key. Let's say you're launching an app or opening up a shop. The day you launch is just day one. If you just close your door, open that model, hire some people, let it run, never change anything in the future, you'll likely fail. That's just one of the main things that we've seen. You iterate on ideas, you iterate on business models, you iterate on features and functionality, and you try to be as ego-free as possible as you go about this process, but iteration is absolutely imperative. Perfect your pitch is really about what is it that you do. Refine that motto. It's the elevator pitch. What is the essence of who you are? What is the essence of your company? Make sure you can always have that guidepost. Because through all that uncertainty, you need to know who you are. So have that as a guidepost. Foster a culture of innovation. I already spoke a fair amount of that, but really make sure that everyone around you is comfortable with the idea of innovation. Have them be a contributing factor to your success, not just a body there doing a task. Let them be creative. Some of the best ideas that we've had and some of our most incredible employees are those that sit there and they think and they ruminate on various ideas, and they'll come back to be like, hey, I was up till like 2 a.m. last night just thinking, and here's an amazing idea, I think. And those are absolutely some of the biggest groundbreaking moments that you've had is through your team. Divergent thinking is really just unstructured thought, brainstorming session, right? Just allow for that. It's not necessarily, okay, I'm gonna innovate, I'm gonna think from like 1 to 3 today. Yes, there's productivity in that, but allow it to be unstructured. Allow it to be in any way, shape, or form, brainstorming sessions to happen. Just be divergent in that thought process. And then another one is trend stacking. So this is a kind of a good, useful one to keep. So let's say you have virtual reality and NFTs, right? 2 very popular things right now. Well, what would they look like together? If you're trying to figure out, okay, I want to start a business, I want to do something in technology. Well, what are the trendiest, what are the most fastly growing, quickly growing from a revenue basis and a user basis? What is attracting all that attention? And can you combine any of these pieces in novel ways? And we see this a lot. Really every day. If you can, 1, 2, or 3 of these can have an incredible impact in terms of you standing out in the market. So most innovations that we experience, everything that you see, it's rarely ever one person. Even if it's one person kind of working in a silo, they're reading books about a subject matter. The entire compounding intellectual property kind of library of humanity is part of that contribution. So most innovations happen through collisions. So Tony Hsieh, here in town, huge fan of the term collisions. And he changed his corporate office headquarters, and he changed everything so that people would encounter each other, sit down for cups of coffee from various departments, and just come up with ideas and innovate together. And so a lot of through these conversations, that's exactly what happened. He prioritized it, wrote about it in books. So it can happen on just a conversational basis, but again, it's the invention of the light bulb is not isolated to Edison, right? There's obviously conflict on exactly, was he a bit aggressive in that stance? Because stealing ideas, but really everything's a compounding idea, right? Innovating upon a filament, innovating upon the glass that allowed that to happen. All of that happens through the power of building things together and collectively. So as we go through here, this is going back to iteration and the way we kind of approach our life cycle. This is a bit kind of engineering focused, but as we look at it, we have the idea itself. We try to design the idea. We engineer the idea, so coding. And then we test the idea with users, with ourselves. So as we start a new product, not only are we going around this loop, but at every point we have an idea and then we iterate on that repeatedly. We design and then we iterate on that. Sometimes it has us go back to new ideas and reset that path. Engineering, we're iterating on that as well, and then also listening for the impact and the feedback from design and ideas, and then we're testing it. That's your feedback loop. You're iterating and iterating upon that to get more feedback. Then you have external feedback, that's coming in. You have new ideas that are coming at every single step of the process. And one of the things that we adopt, so some people develop like waterfall methodologies, where, okay, somebody comes and says, okay, I want to build this app that generally does this task, right? Some people might go about traditionally, with waterfall approach, might try their best to kind of quote it out and say, okay, it's going to cost $100 to do. Or kind of in the software world can often be $1 million, $2 million, $3 million to do. But that becomes fixed, and so you don't allow adaptability because you don't know what you don't know. And those that try to keep a regimented process as they go about creating ideas tend to not come up with the best ideas. If you remain agile, which is what we adopt, it's at any step in the process, from the first day you work through engineering, you're about to go to the end of the whole development process, a great new idea comes about where the industry shifts slightly, you have to be able to listen to that. And if you don't listen to that, then you're going to launch, you're going to spend all these resources, and you might fail. And so allowing at every step of the process and post-launch to allow yourself to iterate. What we've done at Wondour. So we are developing a pair of electronic glasses that help the visually impaired see. And it uses various pieces of technology, but for example, with Dylan's grandfather, he'll be coming up here in a bit, he was able to read a restaurant menu for the first time in almost 3 years with a pair of glasses that we're developing, where ophthalmologists did not have another solution for him. And so as we go about these processes in the world of industrial design, we apply all those same principles of iteration and thinking and user feedback. And so one is just on design. And so design is an incredibly important component, and this is aesthetic design. But as we were going and having conversations, for example, with those that had visual impairments, we were surprised, actually, because we were just listening, of how much they prioritized the aesthetics. I mean, you would imagine that somebody who can't see doesn't care what something looks like, doesn't care what something really feels like, just give me my sense of sight back. But it's not the case. And there's actually research that has backed this up, where you don't want to feel like you have a condition, right? You don't want to go out in public and be stigmatized for, oh, clearly they're wearing a giant headset on their head, clearly there's something wrong with them. They don't want to be stigmatized, they'd rather stay home. So as we were going through the process, form factor immediately became something, because we were listening and open to it, became something that was far more important than we thought. And as we also looked at some of the pieces of technology out there, we overlaid the most popular sunglasses and glasses styles of the last 50 years. We went back through that iteration process and took all the design styles, kind of overlaid them on top of each other, took bits and pieces, designs and shapes from those to arrive at what you see here. And going further, this is true on the more engineering and the technical front. So if you think of, okay, glasses, right? Let's try to replicate and create digital versions of glasses. You might think that, okay, they're static frames. You have the arms and everything connected to one that's a singular unit. You might see that in virtual reality headsets. You see that in traditional glasses and sunglasses. But as we kind of listened and ideated and came up with ideas, we noticed that, well, okay, let's go through the scenario. Well, what if my eye condition's asymmetric? What if I could see, I have one condition in this eye, one condition in this eye, one eye is good, one eye isn't? Well, if you make everything uniform, that doesn't make sense. And then when it comes to engineering down the line, well, what if new technology comes out, or what if you need specialty lenses, for example? Well, how do you swap those out when you have an expensive piece of electronic equipment? That's going to be really expensive for the user, it's going to be expensive for us. And so that's how this came about. So entirely modular system rethinking the way glasses could be built. And so you have some of the electronics in a universal frame. That frame can have certain componentry that's shared across any situation. But then you can actually have that whole lens, and there's basically that front piece is a computer. So there's high resolution cameras and sensors on the front. It's kind of one-way glass that captures the world out in front of you. We then interpret that image, and each one is a computer. We have our own software that runs it, that renders onto a display. That little glass piece that pops out is a folded array optic. You might see that on virtual reality headsets. It allows you to see a screen really far up close. And then a prescription lens. And by doing this, we rethought and just iterated on it. And this is all patent pending, so when it comes to companies issuing patents, we submitted patents for this because we see not only utility in this for those who are visually impaired, but as head-mounted displays and virtual reality headsets get smaller and smaller and smaller, modularity like this we think makes sense for the long term. So we very much follow through this process in everything that we do. This example of the aesthetic piece is going through and just listening to the end user. Well, I want to be able to change styles and colors. And so we came up with a simple solution that really, from a development perspective, doesn't cost too much, but you can just have plastic or metal magnetic attachments to give color. So you can have peak lenses, and they can be half frames. You can change stylistically. You can change this, the whole shape of the sunglasses just through a modular system. So we definitely believe in this. We've seen the benefits of this in our own kind of day-to-day operation. And so that process that we follow, consolidating this, is effectively here. So we define a problem, we ask good questions about that problem, right? And we try to rip it apart. Again, going back to Dylan, he is phenomenal at ripping apart and challenging what people might be, the idea that we're presenting. So whether it's a problem, whether it's an idea, how do you poke holes in it from every which angle? And through that, you're able to understand the true quality of that actual idea. You need to be able to ask really good questions about that. And good questions, kind of a good one is kind of Socratic thinking and Socratic questions where you're asking, well, this, I don't really like this, but why is it evoking this emotion within me? Why do I not really like the output of this beyond just simply like, oh, the shape kind of looks funny? Well, why do I think it looks funny? To take it that next step further, and that's how you really get down to true innovation. You do research, right? We do a ton. It's always R&D, always R&D season. You're always researching. It's Google search, it's talking to people. Always do your research on these things. Form ideas, right? New ideas. Everything we talked about the innovation front. We then test those ideas rigorously, put them through every scenario we possibly can. We review the results, and ultimately we find out whether or not that solution, that product, that individual feature is worthwhile. And taking that approach, right? Again, trying to do a real life example. For today, we took an hour out. So we did a 1 hour kind of case study. So we just took an hour out of our day and tried to go through and just pick something to be able to apply this process to. And obviously, when given the choice, right, we want to choose something exciting and interesting, so we chose computer keyboards, because we knew it would just be a great hit with the audience. So computer keyboards, let's rethink what a computer keyboard is, what it should be. So if we're designing a computer keyboard, so the ones we use today, right, it's like QWERTY, right, QWERTY, the reason if you kind of look at the keyboard, it's kind of nonsensical. If you were to build your keyboard today, would you build it this way? The answer is, I almost guarantee you, statistically, you would never put the letters in the same exact arrangement. And the reason that is because typewriters. And so based on how you were typing, if you remember the typewriters that would have the arm come up and actually make the letter, they didn't want them to get jammed. And so you wanted to space letters apart in a particular fashion so that the typewriter arms would not get jammed with one another, so they could come down smoothly. And so the byproduct of that, and just societally we've continued to use that, is why we have this today. But if you were to think about it from scratch, you might think, put them in alphabetical order, because we all know the alphabet. That's my toddler, my 2-year-old knows the alphabet. That's one option. So you might put it together in that way, or you might think about it in kind of a more statistical way, which is what we did. Is we found, okay, that renders absolutely terribly on that screen, by the way. But what this is going in order of what are the most used letters in the alphabet. So for example, the top one is E, right? And E is that chart that goes way up. So it's used, let's see, over 12% of the time. So 12% of the time you are typing in E. And then it goes down sequentially. So the top 10 characters, and we have 10 digits, right? Top 10 characters alone account for 74% of every letter you ever type. So as we looked at the scenario, we thought, okay, well, this is a good place to start. Probably should just align that. And if you guys actually put your hands on a keyboard, you'll notice that it's completely nonsensical. Like you have letters that are way down this list are like where your index finger is actually typing, which doesn't make any sense. And so this is the order of the most used letters, the least used letters. That none of you thought you were going to walk away with this incredible amount of information on keyboards. And so we took that information, kind of logically went through that, and thought, okay, well, where do our hands naturally sit? How do we prioritize that from a product perspective? And so you'll see in the area of green, right, that is basically where your hands rest and within a key position. You also notice things like spacebar, right? Your thumbs are incredibly quick, responsive, you use them all the time, yet it's just shared with this giant spacebar that just sits there that you can use either finger for. So, I mean, as we go through, it doesn't really apply, great thought or great understanding as to why it's structured that way. So what if we map the keys and priority of the most used characters based on finger speed, shared workload, and minimized finger travel? So your dominant hand, for example, is even your slowest finger on your dominant hand can oftentimes be faster than your fastest finger on your less dominant hand. So right-handed people, left-handed people. That's, again, in 1 hour, interesting fact that I learned. But prioritize that, build it that way. So your index fingers, obviously, you're always on there. So put E right there where your index finger lives. Don't make your fingers travel and do odd pinky exercises all the time when it's unnecessary. Use both thumbs, break that element apart. Go through and kind of rethink really what this should actually look like. And if you did, you'd probably end up with something closer to this. So this could be our actual keyboard that we use. You could use things like touch sensitivity. You tap lightly, you get one letter. You hit hard, you might get a different letter, or you might get a capital letter, something that's intuitive and inherent. And in theory, this could be reworked and ultimately improve efficiency pretty significantly. Also with that, so mainline finger position. So if you look at where your fingers just rest on a keyboard, for our current keyboards, 25.54% of letters that we type fall on those fingers. In our proposed 1-hour workshop version, 74% of all of the letters of the alphabet, you're already having fingers touch them. And then, of course, the question arises, why? Why am I talking about this stuff to you right now? Why does it actually matter? So, as we gain 70% efficiency in typing, that can have, especially on something like typing, right? Who's excited about keyboards? No one's going to raise their hand. Who uses a keyboard? Everyone's going to raise their hand, right? And so, as we look at that on a global scale, so let's kind of do some math here. So, if the average adult, this is a bit simplified, but if the average adult typing speed is 40 words a minute, average time typing on a keyboard, the average American spends about 3 hours a day typing on a keyboard. So this is one of our main activities that we do. The average adult typing time per year, so 1,095 hours per each one of us. So 45.6 days of our life each year is spent typing on a keyboard. So if we extrapolate that out, expand it. So American adults typing per year. So it's 282 billion hours per year are spent typing. 11 billion days, 11.7 billion days are spent typing, or 32 million human years every year. So in the United States, 32 million years a year is spent typing. I mean, that's astounding to actually think about that at scale. So if we applied our new keyboard, let's say taking that and improving that by 70%, we now free up 13 million human years every single year to do something else, to innovate, to come up with ideas. And if you think, like, we just spent 1 hour before this, just spent 1 hour figuring out, hey, could we rethink a keyboard? And the outcome is, well, if this could actually be applied, and there's certainly a tremendous degree of complexity and adoption required for something like this, but this is just 1 hour of 2-3 people's time. This is what we come up with. Imagine what 13 million years of human time applied at something creative or something innovative could spark. And this is where we get back to, this is why innovation can change the world, is freeing up a tremendous amount, just like the agricultural revolution, freed up time and shifted workforces. And within the agricultural revolution, we flew a plane and went to space in almost, in terms of human history, in an instant. And we think the same thing can be done as we continue to innovate and drive forward. So that is my lesson on keyboards for today. And so let's look at a few more innovations over time. Optical lenses. So attributed to the ancient Egyptians and Mesopotamians. The compass, pretty useful. China, 300 to 200 BC. Paper, obviously there's parchment, but actual paper as we kind of see it today. China in 100 BC. Printing press, obviously Gutenberg, 1439. Vaccinations, as we go through history. First one was for smallpox in 1796. And just think in 1796, proposing getting sick to not get sick. Bell Labs for semiconductors. Semiconductors are one of the core inventions as it comes to utilizing electronics by Bell Labs. World Wide Web, 1990s. Venmo, right? What if we could instantly pay each other without the complexity of waiting 3-4 days? 2 roommates back in 2010 created Venmo. Self-driving cars. Through to today, we're seeing incredible advancements in self-driving cars and that type of technology. So what do all these things have in common? What about the keyboard example? What does all of that have in common? Well, if we go back to our process, right, and coming up with a magic formula, we kind of organically came up with this. And the way we actually, what we're talking about here, this is just us putting our own thought. We didn't Google it, we didn't follow a process, we just kind of came up with, well, this is I think kind of how we approach problems and how we approach solutions. Through our own process, we rediscovered what could be the one of the most important processes and inventions in human history, which is something we all learned probably in about 3rd grade, and that is the scientific method. And this is something we're going to argue. Again, I didn't think you were going to learn about this, but we would argue that this simple process here is one of the most important things that humanity has ever done. Every invention that you see, every chair you're sitting in, the computer I'm working with, the screen that you see, everything that you see around you has been created by people, and it's been created by the scientific method. And following this rigorously, and following this again and again and again, and compounding that across humanity has gotten us to where we are today. All because of this little scientific method. And again, this is how we felt. It's just like, oh, we came up with this is going to be a great talking point, and we really just ultimately realized this is the scientific method at its finest. And, you know, as I'm mentioning across it, this doesn't just apply to a business or whatever it may be, it can apply to you, just on a personally daily basis, certainly. So your life as you go about it, let's say you're having a problem with something, right, you aren't in shape, so what are you going to do, right? You might go through this process and say, okay, well, maybe I need to change my diet. And then you try to do research. And you're like, oh, keto diet, that's what everybody's talking about. And you try the keto diet. And then you assess the results. And you're like, well, this didn't work at all. And then you go back to the drawing board, right? You try the next diet, and you try different workout regimens. You kind of do the scientific method, but actually having this in the back of your mind as you're approaching these things is incredibly useful. It's incredibly useful for us as a business. It's incredibly useful for us as an individual. If you just follow this, I mean, it's quite basic, can solve incredible problems that you have in your life. And then, not to be overlooked is, once you actually have an idea and you've gone through this process and you think it's a fantastic idea, you've implemented it, user feedback is fantastic, customers are coming in, your life is getting better, you should always allow opportunity to revisit ideas and improve ideas. Continually allow those, even the greatest ideas and the greatest inventions, allow a process for that to be reanalyzed, reinsert itself back into that process that we talked about, and ultimately re-innovate. And so tying it all back together, right? Make innovation part of your daily routine. Innovation can make your life independently better. It can make the life around you better. It can make your work life better, your company, your corporation. And then there will always be problems. They arrive naturally. They arrive as a result of what we do. And as long as we can innovate faster than those problems arise by doing what we just talked about here, we will have a net positive on the world, and we can save the world. We can improve our lives, and ultimately have all the amazing new technologies that we have out in the world today. Innovation, in our mind, is one of the core principles for successful existence and successful companies. And with that, a tremendous thank you for coming out today.